Hey real estate nerds, this is Alex here with Pro Tip Tuesday, my favorite day of the week. And today I want to talk to you about House Bill 23-1171. Now I'm going to try to unpack my major concerns in this bill inside of a 5-minute window. I probably will not accomplish that, but I'll do my best. I would encourage you to go pull the bill up on the Colorado General Assembly website, Google Colorado General Assembly, and in the search bar at the top, just type in 23-1171 or HB23-1171. and print this thing out, grab a highlighter, and follow along. I'm going to be highlighting my major concerns, but there are a lot of elements to this bill that are concerning, so I will not be able to touch on everything. I'm trying to kind of get the word out about how problematic this bill is with some of these major points. And I would like to hopefully encourage landlords in Colorado and potentially even tenants alike to help us to fight this bill and to encourage those who are voting on it to vote no. And I'll talk at the end of this bill about how you can help us to make an impact in that regard. So there are a couple major concerns. First of all, the bill is titled the Just Cause Eviction Bill. Now, as you and I understand the word eviction, most of us assume the word eviction means basically the forcible removal of a tenant through the legal process as a result of a lease violation. Almost everyone, I'd say probably 90% of people think that's what the word eviction means. However, this bill is pretty misleading in that it's actually just referring to non-renewal of the lease. When the lease is over, basically it restricts when and basically how you are going to be able to remove a tenant from your contract or from the premises. Basically into 3 categories. Now, there are some other examples, like if they won't sign their lease or if there's a major lease violation or whatever. But generally, the reasons that you could non-renew somebody in a way that's reasonable fall within 3 categories. And I'm going to read that word for word. Demolition or conversion of the residential premises is number 1. Substantial repairs or renovations to the residential premises, or occupancy of the residential premises assumed by the landlord or a family member of the landlord. So basically, you're demolishing or converting the property, you're doing substantial repairs, or you're moving back in, or one of your family members is moving back in. Now, each of these reasons are well defined and there's stipulations around each. So for example, where it talks about renovations, it specifically says, we're not talking about cosmetic repairs. If you just want to repaint your house, that's not enough. It specifically calls out repainting. That's not enough. You'd have to be doing a project that takes several months, like a major renovation, like you're, I don't know, redoing the entire kitchen or the basement or something. And even in that example, the tenant would have the first option to return to the premises and to occupy again. So it's, once you're done with the work, you have to give them the opportunity to move back in. Note that of the 3 reasons that I just mentioned, I did not say the sale of the property. Currently, as it's listed in the bill, that's not a reasonable reason to end a lease. Imagine being a military person and you need to sell your property so you can buy another property where you've PCS'd to, because maybe you bought it on a VA 0% down and you waited for some equity and now you need to take some of that equity to put your family in a new home. Well, selling, I want to sell my house, is not a reasonable reason, which is completely crazy in my opinion. The other thing is that you may have a situation that doesn't technically fall under one of these 3 categories, where you just have a horrible tenant. We've talked about there's bad actor landlords and bad actor tenants, but in this example, we have a bad actor tenant who technically is paying on time, but I don't have technically a reason to actually evict them. But we just want to end the tenancy because it's been a nightmare for everybody. That would not be a reason either. There are plenty of times where that may be the case. I want to keep on renting the property, but just not to you. And we'd be stuck with these people. And then the next point is that if you are going to renew the lease, you basically would have to renew the lease under substantially similar terms. So it specifically says that not only would the lease have to be substantially similar, but also you'd have to renew them at a reasonable increase, which is almost like a soft, casual, sneaky way of doing rent control or putting rent control in. Because let's take an example. Let's say that I don't know, you were nice to the tenant for 7 years and it was a long-term tenant, you didn't raise their rent. Well, now maybe you've retired and you need every dollar you can get out of that property based on its fair market value. So you need to do a pretty sizable increase if you're going to keep the property. Well, now, would that be considered reasonable? If you did a $600-700 increase because you were nice for a really long time, would that be reasonable? Maybe not. Maybe you have a battle to be fought with this tenant who's now basically making you keep them in there at a more reasonable increase amount. And then beyond that, let's say you bought a property with a tenant already in place, or you're a property manager and you assume a property with a tenant already in place, with a lease already in place. You may be stuck with whatever lease you get. You know, most of us want to convert them to our lease so that we're always doing things the same and we're operating within the contract that we use every day versus some random person's contract. Now we may be stuck with that random person's contract. One of the final provisions of major concern as I'm going through this, again, trying to speak very quickly, is that as it stands right now, in the bill, landlords would have to pay a tenant 2 to 3 months of rent to help them with moving expenses, even if they have one of those 3 reasons to end the contract, and a substantially longer notice requirement, depending on the length of the lease. Go read the bill, look that over, so you can understand why it would be 2 versus 3 or 3 versus 2, and what kind of notice requirement you'd need to give to a tenant. And note that the tenant is not required to give a longer notice, just the landlord. And so really those are the major concerns that we see right now in the bill. Again, probably the most problematic bill that I've seen. And if you want to help us to combat this bill right now or within the next 24 hours, this is likely to be heard in front of the House. It will then go to the Senate. And before it goes to the Senate, I will be posting on the Colorado Springs Landlord Forum Facebook page. And as a member of the CLLC, we'll be sending out letters to all of our members, the Colorado Landlord Legislative Coalition, to help us with calls to action, which is basically a letter blasted out to everyone who's voting on the bill. But please, please, please consider, I know it's uncomfortable, but please consider joining us in testimony. When it goes in front of the Senate, we need to show up with an army of humans that are all in unison saying, this is a bad bill, please vote no, and here's why. So please stay tuned and please help join the fight so that we can keep this bad piece of legislation away from our state. That's all for now. We'll see you next week.